Trent Cotney and John Kenney are dedicated to helping the construction industry with legal business and safety challenges. Welcome to this week's episode of Law and Mortar.
Hey, this is Trent Cotney. I'd like to welcome everybody to another episode of Law and Mortar. As always, I've got my partner in crime here, John Kenney. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. As always, it's always great to be back on our Law and Mortar, our favorite
Yeah,
podcast.
I know. We've been doing it for a while now, and we were chatting a little bit before. A lot to talk about. Election cycle, obviously, a lot going on there. But what's interesting is that the regulations and the rules and all that just keep coming. Recently, the Federal Trade Commission announced that they were going to start really cracking down on fake reviews and those companies that solicit fake reviews. So this is a big thing, John. Within every, consumer-based construction trade group or contractor, you're relying on those reviews, whether it's Google or, Angie's List or, whatever it might be, right? Yelp. Fake reviews, sort of proliferate out there. So this is really a concerted effort to kind of crack down on that. It's getting reviews is always a difficult thing, and it's a tough process. There are some, legitimate groups out there that will, solicit your customers and ask for reviews, whether it's positive or negative, right? But I think the FTC is primarily concerned here about people that are spoofing or faking that kind of stuff. And what's also interesting is even before this, Google and other tech companies were cracking down on it. There I've seen a string of lawsuits that have been brought against various construction companies based on fake reviews, saying that it was fraudulent and deceptive trade practices, right? So suing, having homeowners or whatever sue, say, hey, you lied to us. We relied on these reviews. They're fake and that's deceptive. So interesting trend here, and I'm curious to see how this kind of unfolds. It's got to be difficult to police, but what are you hearing on your end, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, a couple things. I think with the world of AI and bots coming out, it's getting even easier for these reviews to be non-genuine. We'll let it go at that. And I also think there's a whole nother aspect to it of people getting bad reviews put on competitors' websites. I hear a lot of that, which is crazy that you even have time to worry about that. But I will say one thing that I always like when I'm teaching contractors and working with contractors about reviews. Yes, Google Online is great, but I always tell them, go back, man, get those video testimonials from your real clients. Get the actual letter of reference. Get something real because that goes a long way. One real video or two videos from a client will outbeat 15, 20, 30 Google reviews because they're going to know it's real and they got something to track. So I think again, from a contractor point of view and standpoint is get a mix of it, right? Get a little bit of everything. I realize you got to have them, but I don't know. Maybe we put too much emphasis on these reviews as a contractor rather than try to work around them.
Amen, brother. That from my perspective, word of mouth is probably the best review you can
Yep.
get, right? So you do good work, and I've got a trusted friend that tells me this person's good. That's the only review I need, right? And there that says a lot. So regardless of what technology's out there, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that's the best review
Well,
you can get.
as anybody who comes to our history of roofing presentations and follows us, roofers have been doing business for millennials without technology of getting Google reviews or star reviews. So, as you say, word of mouth, you do a good job, you're going to get hired.
Yeah, that is the truth. When I'm kind of thinking out there, I guess what else are you hearing on your end? It seems like I'm getting a lot of more contractors that are having just concerns about their business, especially ones that are starting up. Operationally, they don't really know what to do. They're looking for help. They're struggling. It's like any business owner. Nobody teaches you how to really run a business until you go in and run a business. What are some of the issues you talk to contractors daily? What are some of the things that you're kind of dealing with? And I know you've been on the road a bunch too.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I hear in general from the, newer contractor, fairly new startup within a few years is the biggest trouble they're having is that transition to go from I'm doing it all to now I got to start learning how to delegate and hire in order to grow. Because if you don't, there's no way you can grow or honestly survive. If you're going to be running a roofing contracting business, it's impossible to be the one and only person doing it. And I think that's something people have the biggest struggle with is how to do it. I think the next thing I hear from a lot of them is they get themselves into what I like to call the pixie dust promise that they find out there on the internet. I can teach you to do this. You're going to be able to sell this. You're going to be able to expand your whatever it may be, whatever promises. And this is not against anybody. There's a lot of good, legitimate people out there. But just like we talked about fake reviews, it's the same way. There's too much stuff. So I always tell people, you really got to research something before you do it and understand what you're getting yourself into. Because I will say this, there is no magic pill out there that's going to take care of your issues. The only way to do it is to learn the foundational fundamentals of how to run your business in the marketplace that you're in. And then you can build on success from that.
Yeah, and if you're a business owner, you got to dig deep, right? And it's not there's no single person out there that's going to solve all your problems, right? There's a lot of different people that will help you, that will guide you, that will provide you with advice. But at the end of the day, it's you, right? It's you and it's on you, and that is the difference between, an entrepreneur, business owner, and someone that's not, right? And it's unpleasant feeling. It's, we've you and I've been there. We know what it's like, and but there's sometimes you just have to learn things the hard way,
Yep.
and learn from that and kind of figure it out. But surround yourself with smart people and kind of go from there. It's interesting you mentioned that. I was having the same conversation with a contractor earlier today, and we were talking. He had asked me, what do I need in my business to kind of what's the baseline level of protection, right? I don't need the Cadillac, but what's the Toyota Corolla version of risk mitigation? And we were talking about, your contracts and your safety manuals, your employee manuals, that kind of stuff. But it became apparent that operationally that there was just a lack of understanding of how the business actually works, right? I mean, it's tough. It's not, you have to wear every hat as an owner. You got to know how to read a P&L. You've got to be able to turn on the copy machine and, fix a cup of coffee and run your crews and everything else when you're trying to figure stuff out. But one thing I told them as we were talking, I said, look, you know, do some planning. You've got to have a game plan. You've got to have that 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. You've got to have some kind of roadmap that you can measure, right? I'm not talking about just a budget, but I'm talking about what is it that you want to do in your business, right? And kind of work towards that. Because if you don't, you're just kind of aimlessly going around putting out fires, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I assume you've had the same conversations.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up about minimal protection. Anybody who goes to you, Trent, is going to get as much of the greatest and closest to a bulletproof contract that they can get. But the problem I'm finding is that's great, but if you don't know how, if you cannot administer that correctly from the time you sign it until you completely close the job out, the contract's not going to do you any good. If you're not following your own contract and properly administrating and managing risk within your own company, then that contract now just becomes another piece of paper that you're not utilizing.
From my perspective, the yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The documents, it doesn't matter whether I or anybody else provides the most brilliant documents in the world, if you're not executing, right? If you're not executing operationally, if you're not executing in field, if you're not managing your subs, then it doesn't matter what's on that piece of paper, right? It can only help you so much, and you've got to have that operational strength. So, and it's a theme that we keep going back to. Almost every episode we talk about that, and I'm a firm believer that you could eliminate 80 to 90% of your legal problems with strong operations, right? I mean,
Yep.
it is usually every legal issue that's out there. If you look back at what the root cause of it was, it's probably an operational breakdown, right? If you get a OSHA citation, there's probably some stuff you could have done better safety wise, or at least on how to handle that OSHA inspection. If you've got an issue with an employee, there's probably something you could have done better HR wise. If you've got a problem with a customer, then there's probably some better way to deal with that from a customer service standpoint or a contract standpoint. And that's the message that I hope we kind of hit home to our listeners is, yeah, I mean, you're constantly traveling, you're giving tons of operation estimating advice. I'm giving the legal advice, but at the end of the day, you've really got to take all of that and look at the big picture, right? It's not, you can't piecemeal stuff. You've got to have your eye on the ball as an owner at all times. And it's
Exactly.
tough, man. It's frustrating.
It's a lot to keep on. It's if you get your pricing set up front, learn how to properly price correctly your work, and then you take the time to learn how to put the procedures in place and then execute operationally those procedures, you will eliminate 95+% of all the roadblocks that are going to become major issues down the road. You're never going to eliminate all of them. It's what I talk about all the time. This is a high risk business, but your whole job is to get the risk mitigated to the least possible ones that you can face when it comes time to face them. And you can't do that unless you're operationally set up to do that.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice. Um, it's interesting because when I'm looking out and I've already started preparing a little bit, I assume you're doing the same thing. But you and I know we've got a busy September. I've got I'm speaking over at FRSA, and then I'm flying out to DC for FEI Group. Then I'm going to the RCAT Expo, and then we're both at Western States. I'm sure you probably have some other stuff going on as well coming up.
Yeah,
Um,
this is a busy time of year now. This is like that big
this
closeout till Christmas.
Yeah, it's just nonstop. So I encourage, anybody that's listening to this, if we're at a place where you're at, stop by and say hi to us. We'll answer questions, any issues that you've got, and we love to kind of meet our listeners. So, John, I want to turn to our favorite time here, and keeping with the first theme of the day, Susan has a question about marketing. Okay, do you think it is better to do your marketing in-house? And by that, she gives examples, social media, SEO, et cetera. Or do you think it's better to use an outside third party to handle that? And if you're using an outside third party, what should you do as an owner to kind of make sure things are being done right? So I'll let you start there, and then
Well,
we'll go.
that's as we always get from our listeners, another great question because you can do it either way. Biggest problem I find with contractors or anybody for that matter when you're using a third party outside is it's just like a subcontractor. If you're not managing or even understanding what they're doing for you, you're probably going to have a fairly not have a good successful run. If you're doing it in-house, it's the same way as having an internal employee. If you're not having someone oversee that with a game plan and a plan in place and a goal and set out at what you plan on doing and then track and then hold accountability, you're going to fail on that as well. So that's the biggest thing. I think one of the advantages today, I've done some talking about working with the Generation Z, the new generation out there. They really get the social marketing aspect way better than any other generation. There's no doubt about it. And I think a lot of companies are starting to gravitate to bringing that in-house, starting out with maybe internships doing that, and then they become good employees in your company. So I think it's probably easier today than it's ever been to really do it in-house, but depends on the size of your company. If you get large enough, then you probably do have to go to outsourcing. And then again, you've got to manage that no different than you would a subcontractor in your operational side of your business.
Yeah, exactly. I think what's measured is managed, right? So there needs to be certain criteria that you set in advance, whether it's, number of leads or number of conversions or whatever it is. You've got to have that criteria set in advance so that you're managing regardless of whether they're W-2s or they're 1099s. There's some metric that needs to be met. And that is a critical function of your business. If you want to scale, you must have good marketing. So you need to keep your eye on that ball at all times.
And there's
So,
all different types of marketing you've got to develop too, depending on
yeah,
where you're at. If people forget that going out and doing one-on-one visitations to different organizations, that should be part of your marketing. That's business development,
absolutely.
which is marketing. So, and depending on what you're really doing, depends on what should be all part of your whole program.
Yeah, yeah, it's a holistic type thing, and all of that you need to have within your plan for growth. Well, John, we've talked about a lot of different things. I think it's time we wrap up here. I'd like to thank everybody for making us the number one construction law podcast in the world. Stay tuned next week for another episode of Law and Mortar. If you'd like to reach me, you can reach me at trent.cotney@arlaw.com or on social at Trent Cotney. John, how can they get you?
As always, you can get me either through social media, look me up, John Kenney, or hit me in an email, jkenney@cotneyconsulting.com.
Great. Thank you guys, and we'll see you on the road.
See you next time.